Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Excoundrel here. Today we're going to be doing a whirlwind 10-minute guide on how to choose a build and some scouting tips that will allow you to do that through the early mid game and then even in the late game. First of all, I've got to thank G2A for sponsoring the channel. There's a reference link to the marketplace in the description below, and if you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. I've appreciated all the support that I've had for my TFT content so far, and you guys have really made it worth it. This will be a bit of a whirlwind tour. We'll be going through some things very quickly, but I'll add timestamps to the description below so you can go back and review certain parts. The first decision that I have is, what do I go for on the very first opening carousel? I like to think about adaptability and I like to think about item paths, and if a certain item is being heavily contested, sometimes it's worth to just scout around for the next best option. So I like to go for Chain Vest, BF Sword, Brawler's Glove, and Recurve Bow, all because they have pretty good adaptable item build paths, plus they build into builds that I'm very comfortable with. I don't like to go for things like Tier or Rod. I just think they pigeonhole you a little bit into certain builds, and they don't have as many adaptable item build paths as the likes of Chain Vest, BF Sword, Brawler's Glove, and Recurve Bow. So I like these four items, but some people may disagree with me. This also comes down to comfort, but you can see some of the items that I've overlaid in terms of potential build paths. That's what I'm thinking about when I'm picking up my first item component. Really important, because that component can sometimes set the pace for your early game. The next decision comes when you get to the end of your first PvE stage and you pick up item components. Now let's take my example here. The best item that I could slam is a Guardian Angel. But Guardian Angel I don't think is the most impactful item I could make with those particular item components. And I'm thinking in my head, Bramble Vest, I'm thinking Shojins, I'm thinking Morello's or Demolitionist Spat. In my eyes, this is a really good opening for a mech game, because I'm pretty close to getting components needed, and these are really adaptable items, so I'm pretty close to the components needed to get those mech items. So think about what you could build rather than what you can build right now as well. We're also looking at scouting in the early game. I usually do this around stage 2-2 or 2-3. I look at which units and which items the enemies have combined together. This is going to allow me to sort of scout for anyone contesting me, but also it's going to give me an indication of what kind of items the opponent is looking for and what kind of builds I'm going to be facing up against. When I'm playing something like mech, I'm most concerned with, is anyone else hoarding Kaisers and Kha'Zixes? And is anyone else slamming an early Morellos? Is anyone else slamming an early Bramble Vest? That's what I'm looking at when I'm playing mech, for instance. When I get to the first carousel, I'm thinking about the best item combination I can make right now versus the best item component for the future. In this example, the best item combination that I had was a Bramble Vest, because I have a 2-star Malphite and he can use that Bramble Vest really nicely. If there was a Spat on this carousel, I would have taken the Spatula, because the best item combination that I could make in the future, or even just right now because I had a Rod, was going to be a Demolitionist Spat. So always weigh up what you can make right now versus what you can make in the future. But a piece of advice that I would say is that it is very important to, at some point during stage 2, make at least one item, because if you don't make any items, you're very likely going to start falling behind in terms of HP. The next thing we're going to go through is a live scouting example from the end of stage 2 here, and it's going to go through very quickly the thought process that I have when I look at everyone's board coming up towards the Krug round. Because this is important, it's going to allow me to explore who could be contesting me and what we're seeing in the game. So this guy could make a GA and he could make a Zephyr, but he's made neither. He's also level 4 and he's hoarding Poppies and Aries and Zoes, and that's making me think Candyland for this player right here. This guy is level 5, he's got a rapid fire cannon, he has a potential red buff, but he also has a potential Ginsu's with a Shen on the bench. This is making me think either Brawler Blaster or Kale. So those are the first two enemies that I scouted. Let's have a look at this guy. This is pretty easy. He has got Brawler Blaster units and a red buff. Very likely that he's going to be going towards a Brawler Blaster build. Let's look at the next player. This guy is level 5, and he's got a Kha'Zix with a Deathblade with Rebels. Now, he's probably not playing Hyper Roll Kha'Zix because he's level 5, and the fact that he's got Rebels makes me think he's probably transferring those items over to Jinx at some point and playing a Rebel build. So let's move on to the next player. This guy is level 5, but he has a Rabadon's Death Cap on the Poppy. Now, he's level 5, so he's probably not playing Candyland, so in my head, I'm thinking some kind of Sorcerer GP build. This guy is really easy. He's level 4, he's got 2 Zeeks, and you never slam Zeeks unless you're playing the Kha'Zix build, so he's likely going to be hyper-rolling after the Krugs for Kha'Zixes and Malphites. This player here has got a Last Whisper, and in my eyes, this could go towards Brawler Blaster or Cybernetics. So, after scouting all of the players, it's pretty clear that no one is really thinking seriously about mech in this game. So this is a good idea now to start working towards your mid-game goals and start confirming the kind of composition that you want to go towards. In my case, it was pretty clear that with no one contesting mech, we wanted to go towards mech. So have a very clear idea in your head about the mid-game. What is my mid-game strategy? Well, for me, for mech, it's get 50 gold, get to level 6, roll for mech and infiltrators. What's the best mid-game board I can have? Well, I haven't transferred over to Kha'Zix and Kai'Sa yet because my best mid-game board is still using this Master Yi and this Rebel setup. Which items can I slam at this point? I don't have any items that I would be comfortable slamming other than a Shojin's, so I'm keeping my items on board right now. And what do I need from the Carousel, and what can I live without? So, for instance, from this next Carousel coming up, it was pretty clear that I needed to stabilize my mid-game, and I was going to need to have something to make my Kai'Sa relevant as soon as we went on. So there was no demo spat here, so the next best option is to go for a Morellonomicon for my Kai'Sa, which is a really big mid-game item and can help you win many, many mid-game fights. So you can see I picked up a Jinx here. I've literally only got the Jinx to help me through the mid-game a bit more. And now as soon as I find the Fizz, I decide to switch over and move myself to the actual mech build, which is what I've done here. Keep scouting in the mid-game. Most people are settling into a build at the end of stage 3. Scout where people are positioned, which is very important for things like mech, because it's important to know where your mechs are going to jump, so your infiltrators are going to jump, and where your mech needs to tank. Check who you haven't played versus. You will never play versus the same player twice in one stage unless someone gets eliminated from the game. So once you've played someone for a stage, you can usually eliminate them from being another option unless someone gets eliminated. Another question that I get asked pretty frequently is, when should I roll down? So at level 4-3, if you go for, at stage 4-3, sometimes people go for a level 8 all-in if your build needs a 5-cost unit and you don't have the HP to spare. A lot of people like to do that. If you're sub 30 HP, especially when you're stage 5+, this is a really good time to roll down. If you're really close to big upgrade breakpoints, and this is big for mech, for instance, because the level 3 mech pilots are really big for HP gain, and the level 3 infiltrators are really important for damage output. So those are the sort of the conditions that I look at when I'm thinking about rolling down. The worst thing that you can do is end the game on 50 gold, especially if you're not coming first. If you're not coming first and you're sort of at risk of being knocked out, the worst thing that you can do as a player is end the game on 50 gold. So if you're on sub 30, even sub 20 HP, you should be rolling all of your gold to look for upgrades, or you should be looking to level up to get an important unit in. It really depends on the composition that you're playing. So as you get towards the late game, you will have had your item path selected. You should kind of know what you're doing. A lot of this now comes down to positioning. This is really important for something like mech. You'll notice in this example, I'm going up against a very strong Candyland player, but I positioned I got caught by the Zephyr, obviously, that was my fault. But I positioned my units in the general vicinity that would be useful in terms of getting the most damage output versus the most important units on my enemy's board. My Lux is also positioned that she would make sure she hit the enemy Lux with her binding, which can help keep my infiltrators unhit in the early game. So you always want to track down who you've played and position for the other players. So for instance, I've already now played the Candyland player. I'm not going to be positioning for him, and I'm having a look towards other players who are mostly positioned in the center and on the right. So I'm going to position specifically over to the right because it's more likely than not that I end up playing a player that's positioned themselves over on the right-hand side of the board rather than the left-hand side of the board, which is why I made that move right there. Always position for the player that you're going to end up being weakest versus, especially when you've got a very low amount of HP. It may help you kill extra units and save you. It may help you give you extra time. And it may help keep you in the game that much longer. That's really, really important in the late game. Really late game really does come down to hitting important upgrades and positioning overall. So in this particular example, we're going into the carousel round. Someone did just get knocked out. So it's now important that I position for my worst case scenario, because there's me on 3 HP and another guy on 2 HP. It's quite clear that the player on 66 HP or 68 HP is going to be walking away with this victory, but I would like to secure myself second. So in this particular example, I'm actually weakest versus the Rebel player rather than the Kale player. And I know that might sound silly, but the Rebel player is actually more threatening to me overall, just because of the fact he has those massive shields and he has the Aurelian Soul there as well. The Kayle player, I'm not as bothered about, because I think the Kayle player is more likely to I'm more likely to be able to beat, or at least have an even matchup versus. The Rebel player is more likely to decimate me in one go. So I'm going to position specifically to deal with the Rebel player, because I want to be able to survive. So I'm actually going to put my Kai'Sa over towards the Rebel side. I'm going to keep my Shaco over on the left-hand side, just because if I do play up against the Kayle player, at least my Shaco is going to be doing some work on the left-hand side here. Like you can see right now, he's putting a lot of pressure onto that Kayle. So I positioned for my worst-case scenario, which was the Rebels, but positioning the Shaco over on the left-hand side did allow me some more time, and that other guy got knocked out instantly. So I ended up getting... I bought a lot of time and ended up getting second place quite nicely here, which, you know, beating a 3-star Kayle probably wasn't going to happen. Hope you found that useful. Hope it's going to help you choose your builds in the future. And yeah, feel free to subscribe if it was good. See you soon.